3 years after her death, she returns home for the first time, only to find the neglected yard filled with smoke. Just then, the sound of the door opening could be heard from behind. It turns out to be her daughter, who has been away for a long time and is returning home. However, upon entering the house, the daughter completely ignores her mother. Yet, upon seeing her long-awaited daughter, Bokja can't help but feel a wave of joy in her heart. However, just as she was eagerly expecting a hug, her daughter walks straight through her body. But why has her daughter, a professor in America, suddenly returned to their rural home in the mountains? And why did she choose to live a life in the countryside that is so out of character for her? What's even more unbelievable to Bokja is that her daughter has opened a small restaurant here. She even seems to enjoy the dirty and tiring labor involved. Bokja is filled with confusion. 2 tourists arrive in the yard, ready to dine. Her daughter, whom Bokja remembers never having cooked before, warmly greets the tourists and brings them tea. She then walks directly to the old, rustic cellar and carefully pulls out some fermented kimchi. Bokja watches curiously as she skillfully prepares a meal for the guests. When the delicious dishes fill the table, even Bokja, now a ghost, can't help but drool. Although she is surprised and delighted by her daughter's progress, Bokja still feels a sense of disappointment deep down. She can't understand why her daughter gave up such a promising future. Instead, she chose to waste her life in a place that didn't belong to her. When Bokja was alive, she did everything she could for her daughter's future. Even when she was gravely ill on her deathbed, she never told her daughter. Fortunately, Bokja won first prize in the Afterlife essay competition, which earned her the right to return to the human world for a 3-day holiday. Jongju, her daughter, was the only person she had worried about in life. She therefore chose to spend her time with her daughter. However, upon her return, she discovered that Jongju had resigned from her job at an American university a long time ago. Bokja was always a proud woman. When she was still alive, she would brag to everyone in the village that her daughter was a professor in America. Now that she has passed away, hearing others gossiping about her daughter behind her back, she can only stand by helplessly and worry.
돈은 되나 몰라. 대전 뭐가 돼? 굶어죽 다 닮았지. 지랄하고 자빠졌다 이놈의 영감탱이나. 너미사.
But Jongju's cuteness was irresistible. The citizens couldn't resist her tender heart. But once she left, she muttered to herself, praying that Bokja wouldn't get angry. Even though Bokja was sitting right next to her, she heard her friend's honest thoughts. No one in the world could see him anymore. No one could hear her speak either. Yet she spent every day quietly following her daughter and accompanying her, watching her become a skilled cook, just like her. She watched her live in the place she once called home. Bokja's nagging never stopped. But Jongju enjoyed the quiet, peaceful rural life in her own way. He roasts coffee beans on the clay stove that Bokja once used, doing it all by hand. Then he grinds them slowly by hand and brews a cup with boiling water. Finally, he sits contentedly on the terrace, basking in the sun. Even though his invisible mother was scolding him up close, and Jongju's ears felt a little itchy, as if someone was gossiping about her nearby, the mother and daughter now live in 2 different worlds. But soon enough, Bokja would discover the reason why her daughter had returned home. One night, Jongju, who was rolling around, suddenly sat up. After letting out a long breath, she immediately walked outside. Then he started running faster and faster. He ended up on a bridge, shouting towards the dark and silent river below.
내가 미치겠다, 엄마. 내가 엄마 때문에 못 살겠다!
At that moment, Bokja acutely felt the sorrow of being separated from someone by life and death. Tears welled up in her aged eyes. The next morning, she followed Jongju to the hospital once more. Only then did she realize that the real reason her daughter had come back home was because of her. Despite appearing calm and composed, Jongju was already suffering from depression. She struggled with insomnia every night and often woke up in distress. Bokja finally understood her daughter's pain. When she overheard Jongju's conversation with her psychiatrist, her heart was shaken to its core.
날 왜 버렸을까? 그런 생각.
But from Bokja's perspective, their relationship had long been cold and distant. There were times when she called Jongju 10 times, only for 9 of them to go unanswered. Her lovingly prepared kimchi was always met with disdain. She constantly called to invite Jongju home for meals. But Jongju always had countless excuses. Even before she went to the US, Jongju hadn't come to say goodbye to her mother. When Bokja passed away in the forest, Jongju never got to see her mother one last time. The reason for all this was, it could all be traced back to Bokja's past choices. After her husband passed away early, Bokja had to raise Jongju alone from a young age. In those economically difficult times, she had to work multiple jobs a day. Even when working as a housekeeper, she had to bring Jongju with her. As a result, she was often dismissed by employers who disapproved. After Jongju started school, living expenses and tuition fees only increased. This left Bokja, who had no special skills, in dire straits. Eventually, with no other options, she had to send Jongju to live with her younger brother. Jongju felt as though she had lost her only home. She saw it as the first time her mother had abandoned her. Later, Bokja was introduced to a wealthy man. However, he made an outrageous demand that she not bring Jongju into his home. If she agreed, he would support Jongju until she graduated from college, and even fund her studies abroad. Bokja just wanted her daughter to have a better life through education. Hoping that she wouldn't end up at the bottom of society like her, she eventually agreed after much contemplation. But after the marriage, although she was technically the lady of the house, she lived like a maid in her second husband's home. She cooked, cleaned, and did housework every day. She even received a salary from her husband each month. However, this sacrificial devotion to her daughter's welfare, this devotion became a lifelong shackle from which Jongju could never escape. One day, while her in-laws were away on holiday, Bokja invited Jongju to a small gathering at their city home. Jongju happily went to her mother's house, only to find that the walls were covered with photos of her stepfather and his children. There was not a single photo of her mother among them. Suddenly, an indescribable pain welled up inside her. While Bokja joyfully prepared a whole table of food for Jongju, she didn't even get a chance to ask about her daughter's life or studies. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Her short-sighted husband had returned early from holiday with his children. They saw Jongju and the full table of food. Bokja hurriedly tried to explain.
오늘 학교 일찍 끝난다. 걔가 밥이나 좀 먹고 가라고.
But Bokja's husband's expression changed instantly. In a mocking tone, he muttered sarcastically,
너 공부 열심히 해야 돼, 임마. 네 엄마가 공부 시키려고 이곳 사는 거야. 알아? 공부라는 게 다 때가 있어, 때가. 많이 먹고 가라. 누가 다 먹어, 이건? 남기면 다 음식 쓰레기지. 하여간 손은 가가지고.
Jongju was so angry that he felt physically ill. As she left, Bokja even packed up all the food to take home. With her pride deeply hurt, Bokja sadly escorted Jongju to the bus. Jongju clutched the many lunchboxes. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. At that moment, he held not only the food that had been given out of pity, but also the humiliation that she and her mother had endured. He also felt an overwhelming sense of sadness and hatred. This was the second time that Jung-ju had felt abandoned by his mother. However, young Jung-ju could never comprehend her mother's good intentions. Everything she did, for his own good, only served to make him feel suffocated and helpless. This grew into a deep hatred of Bokja. For not having the presence of a mother since childhood, Jung-ju could only respond with rejection to the maternal love she was given. Although Bokja realized that Jung-ju misunderstood her, she remains overwhelmed with guilt and feels like she doesn't love her enough. She became cautious and pleading in her words. She would even start talking about cooking just to invite her daughter home for dinner.
진주야, 내가. 니 바쁘나?
왜?
아니, 별일 있는 거 아니고. 내가 이제 벽돌을 쌓아서 그냥 흙을 싹 발라가 아궁이를 분통처럼 이쁘게 만들어놨거든. 그리고 가마솥도 하나 사왔다. 그 솥뚜껑에다가 막 그 삼겹살 먹으면 막 기름기가 싹 빠져갖고 엄청 맛있겠어. 니 언제 한번 내려올? 그 같이 삼겹살 좀 구워 먹게.
엄마 나 수업 들어가. 나중에 전화할게.
At this moment, the neglected Bokja resembled a lonely, helpless bucket thirsting for water in the snow. Afterward, Bokja opened a small restaurant in their old family home. She would call every now and then, asking when Jung-ju would come home. But every time, calls either went unanswered or she said she was too busy. One day, Bokja finally couldn't hold back and went into the city to see Jung-ju. But her daughter was very disgusted by the kimchi she brought.
이러는 건데.
딸내미 반찬 좀 해온 게 그래 죄가.
아니 원룸 사는 거 뻔히 알면서 이렇게 바리바리 싸갖고 와가지고 우리가 한 입을 덮고 잘 만큼 살가운 사이야?
엄마랑 딸이 마주 앉아서 밥 한 끼 먹는 하룻밤 이런저런 얘기 나누면서 잠도 같이 문자나.
그럼 다른 엄마들처럼 그렇게 키우지 그랬어?
After a few quarrels, Bokja felt as though her heart had been torn apart. Feeling helpless, she left her daughter's home. She was alone, like a wandering soul among the bustling crowd. In a city of millions, there wasn't even room for a mother to spend the night. Sadly, she looked at the brightly lit streets, while her heart was utterly dark. Then she went into a 24-hour McDonald's. She bought the cheapest ice cream cone and asked the staff to show her how to text. She sent a message to her daughter. At that moment, she realized that she shouldn't have sent her mother away. Jung-ju hurried back to apologize and stop her mother from leaving. She also received Bokja's message. He looked down at his phone. In it, Bokja told Jung-ju that she had already boarded the bus. She asked her daughter not to worry. She also reminded her to eat and sleep on time. After reading the message, Jung-ju looked up at her mother through the glass window. At that moment, he didn't have the courage to expose his mother's lie. So he stood silently outside the shop. As the ice cream in her hand slowly melted, he stayed outside with Bokja all night. Jung-ju's feelings for Bokja were a mixture of repressed love and a desire to escape because he didn't know how to respond. Although he could understand his mother's good intentions, understanding didn't mean acceptance. Such idealized communication and sugary motherly love are how most parents and children actually relate. Later, Jung-ju went abroad to study. But soon after arriving in the US, Bokja suddenly had a heart attack and passed away. This was the third time his mother had abandoned him. Jung-ju couldn't bear being abandoned time and again. That's why he developed severe depression. Until Bokja returned to the human world, she saw that Jung-ju had given up a bright future. She came back to live where she had lived before. She finally realized that Jung-ju was resisting the motherly love and repeated abandonment he had experienced in his own way.
부모 자식 참 먼지. 그 딸도 네가 많이 잡는 거?
내가 문망대가 저래 있는 것 같다. 이 휴가 동안에 1박 2일 2박 3일 4일 5일 6일 7일 8일 9일 10일 11일 12일 13일 14일 15일 16일 17일 18일 19일 20일 21일 22일 23일 24일 25일 26일 27일 28일 29일 30일 31일 32일 33일 34일 35일 36일 37일 38일 39일 40일 41일 42일 43일 44일 45일 46일 47일 48일 49일 50일 51일 52일 53일 54일 55일 56일 57일 58일 59일 60일 61일 62일 63일 64일 65일 66일 67일 68일 69일 70일 71일 72일 73일 74일 75일 76일 77일 78일 79일 80일 81일 82일 83일 84일 85일 86일 87일 88일 89일 90일
원망이라도 풀고 가야 되는데.
One day, Jongju's close friend came to visit him. She urged him to go to Seoul for depression treatment, but Jongju refused.
벌 주는 거야, 난.
뭐라고? 벌을 준다고? 어?
내가 엄마 임종이라도 지켰으면 여기서 이러고 있지도 않아. 나 때문에 장례도 늦어져가지고 차가운 냉동실에 이틀이나 더 있었어.
야, 다 뒤졌는데 니게 뭔 상관인데? 어?
왜 서울에도 자리 있는데 미국까지 도망가서 그 지랄을 했는지.
At that moment, Bokja finally realized that Jongju's feelings towards her were not just resentment, but also a quiet kind of love. She continued to live in the house she had owned previously. She ran the restaurant she used to run, and kept all her belongings. It turned out that she was trying to recreate the closeness and intimacy that had once existed between mother and daughter. She lived life the way her mother did, doing what her mother used to do. She kept her mother in her heart. She saw her mother's loneliness and the pain she had caused her. Using the method her mother had used to make dumplings, she made a batch to share with her close friend. But they were so awful that not even he could swallow them. She kept experimenting, summarizing each experience. But in the end, he still couldn't recreate his mother's flavor. He went to ask his mother's close friend for advice. She told him that Bokja had used white radish in the dumpling filling. This is because the crisp sweetness of white radish symbolizes resilience and hope in life. Jongju suddenly understood. He hurried back home. He carefully remade the dumpling filling like his mother did, and silently prayed that it would turn out well. However, when his close friend tasted it, she said the flavor was too mild. Nevertheless, Jongju had finally tasted his mother's flavor. She was moved that he had finally recreated her unique dumpling recipe. Mildness represented his mother's lifelong hardships. By recreating his mother's food, that he could create the illusion that she was still with him. After all, a mother's love is the most beautiful thing in the world. All the delicious meals and gentle embraces from mothers everywhere are irreplaceable memories that stay with us throughout our lives. One day, Jongju passed a McDonald's. He couldn't resist going inside and ordering a small ice cream. He held the cone tightly and let it slowly melt. And with it came memories of that day. Memories of that night with his mother flooded his mind. Bokja saw Jongju holding the ice cream and finally understood all of Jongju's feelings.
니 다 봤나? 다 보고 있었나? 나는 다 잊어버렸는데 뭐하러 기억하고 사나 별것도 아닌 거를. 엄마들은 다 잊어본다. 속상한 거, 서운한 거 다 잊어본다. 좋은 것만 기억하고 사는 게 부모 아이가. 그러니까 너도 다 잊어버리라. 알았나?
Motherly love can provide a warm shelter. However, it can also put pressure on a daughter due to overprotection or high expectations. In this moment, the melting ice cream cone symbolizes their shared love. That night, Bokja's close friend came to their house. She told Jongju many stories about Bokja. Bokja had led a poor life, but she was incredibly resilient. She painstakingly raised her younger brother, and she put a lot of effort into raising Jongju. She worked in a factory, even injuring her hand in the process. She didn't want to abandon Jongju. However, she felt more secure in trusting Jongju to her younger brother. She also believed that working alone would earn her more money. It wasn't that she didn't want to include Jongju in her second marriage. She just wanted to give Jongju a better life in her own way.
자도 딸 때나 놔놓고 평생 외롭게 살았다.
네 엄마가 돈 안 보내주시면
외삼촌이나 외숙모가 그래 한결같이 끝나.
알아요.
엄마는 왜 그런 결정을 했을까? 엄마 진짜 바보다 그랬거든요. 근데 엄마 돌아가시고 옆에 없으니까 바보더라고. 엄마도 방법이 없었구나.
아니다. 다 내가 모자라서 그런 게다. 내가 모자라.
Bokja was very hurt when she heard this. It turned out that she had always acted in the belief that she was doing what was best for her daughter. But she had ignored what her daughter really wanted. Love is deep. Deep, heartfelt love can give everything, even youth and life, but it can also hurt, leaving wounds that are difficult to heal. However, mothers are not the only ones who struggle to express love. Daughters also keep their affection deep in their hearts, not knowing how to express it. Jungju's biggest guilt and sorrow is that, despite working hard, she ended up living a life that didn't suit her. She left her mother alone and cold. She could have put her shame aside and tried to communicate with her mother back then. This would have enabled her to rebuild a closer relationship with her mother. However, her mother's sudden departure left her with no opportunity to address this regret. Losing a loved one is not an act of revenge, but an enduring source of distress. We are forever trapped in this humidity, stirring up storms on days that should be calm. Although Jungju never understood Bokja, Bokja wrote all her regrets in her diary.
전화를 안 받는다. 바쁜가? 눈이 많이 하얗다. 진주가 보면 좋다 했을 때. 니를 다 키우고. 나는 네가 좋은데 나는 또 네 때문에 마음이 아프다. 내가 왜 싫으노, 진주야?
Actually, Bokja regrets the moment they're written in the diary. She's already chosen to forget them, because a mother never remembers her child's faults. But she didn't expect Jungju to hate the version of herself who once spoke harshly to her mother because of this diary. She also hated the version of herself who went to America to escape her mother, but missed the chance to see her one last time. She was trapped in endless guilt every month. She regretted not telling her mother the truth behind these regrets sooner. Actually, she didn't avoid her mother's calls because she didn't want to answer. She was really just too busy. Every time she saw the calls, she wanted to reply, but she was so busy late into the night that she didn't want to disturb Bokja's rest, so she gave up. Actually, Jungju also came to see Bokja before going to the US. But Bokja didn't know that night she stood in the yard and saw her mother happy. So she seemed comforted. So she chose a silent love and farewell. She secretly left the supplements Bokja bought on the porch. Actually, Bokja was also irreplaceable in Jungju's heart. One night, Jungju's boyfriend came to the countryside. He begged Jungju to marry him. But Jungju refused, because her ex-fiancé's mother looked down too much on Bokja's background. She wanted Jungju to choose her uncle as the officiant at the wedding. But Jungju cancelled the engagement for that reason, because in her heart, only Bokja should sit in that position. Hearing this, Bokja, now a ghost, felt immense pain. It turned out she was so important to her daughter. It was just that her daughter never said it aloud. But because of her daughter, she had resolutely given up her own love. Suddenly, Bokja felt overwhelming shame and guilt again. Late at night, she sat alone in the yard, her heart flooded once more with endless self-blame.
결혼식 그 자리에 앉을 자격도 없는 나 뭐 한다고? 똑똑한 년이 못나게 왜 방언했는 말이다, 응? 좋은 남편 만나서 자식 낳고 사는 게 그게 복인데, 응?
In a moment of urgency, she kicked the iron bucket. Clearly, she was a wandering spirit. It was forbidden for her to touch the objects of the living. She didn't realize that she had committed a grave offense in the underworld. Before long, a messenger from the underworld found her. Because of the trouble she had caused, Bok-ja had to cut her holiday short. At daybreak, she had to return with the messenger. But strangely, Bok-ja didn't refuse. Instead, she begged the messenger sincerely to allow her to visit her daughter one last time, to apologize to her in person. The messenger told her, if she did, she would have to pay a heavy price. She would lose all her memories of her daughter. If that happened, she would really become a lonely lost ghost. The most tragic outcome would be if Bok-ja could meet Jung-ju later in the afterlife. Bok-ja won't recognize Jung-ju. Jung-ju won't recognize Bok-ja. Bok-ja fell to the ground after hearing this. She couldn't accept such an outcome. As a wandering spirit, now her memory is the only bond she has with her daughter. However, after careful consideration, Bok-ja made her decision.
하자. 내가 뭐 하게? 우리 진주 웃고 사는 게 더 중요하지.
At that moment, the messenger was also moved by the great motherly love. He and Bok-ja were lying in the cold yard, comforting the greatest pain a mother could experience. As the moon in the sky grew brighter, Bok-ja slowly made his way to his daughter's window.
어디 갔다 이제 왔어?
네 엄마 기다렸나?
밥은?
엄마 배 안
생일인데 미역국도 안 먹고 내가 하루 종일 기다렸잖아.
Bok-ja happily cupped her daughter's face, just as he had when she was little. Jung-ju stood up happily, drawing on memories of her mother and the cooking skills she had learned since returning home. She carefully prepared a large table of delicious birthday dishes for her mother. Their once silent and distant mother-daughter relationship was now filled with warmth and the aroma of food. Each dish on the table seemed to express their unspoken love for one another. They ate the meal very slowly, as if making up for all the lost companionship and love of the past in one night. Bok-ja had finally untied Jung-ju's emotional knot. Their bond grew stronger still in the warmth of this meal. It would never fade. After the meal, they sat together on the porch, leaning on each other and watching the full moon. They shared their longing for each other. They also apologized to each other.
진주야. 네가 공부를 많이 했어. 엄마랑은 다른 인생을 살기를 바랬습니다.
알지. 엄마. 내가 속이 좋아서. 봐봐. 엄마 덕분에 내가 이만큼이나 됐어. 엄마가 내놓은 엄마의 꽃 같은 인생을 내가 대신 살고 있구나. 그걸 알면서도 엄마를 혼자 왜 이렇게 만났지? 미안해 엄마. 고마워 엄마.
그래 말해주세요 진짜로. 진주.
They once had misunderstandings, resentment, and sacrifice. But they also had deep affection. Guilt and regret were also present. Once upon a time, when we were young and naive, we often misunderstood our mother. Her seemingly harsh demands, those decisions that allowed no argument, planted seeds of resentment in our hearts. But our mother gave up her dreams and the brilliant times that once belonged to her. She silently endured the pressures of life, she never once complained in front of us. It was her increasingly tired body that sheltered the sky under which we grew up. Now, the resentment and misunderstandings of the past have gradually turned into deep guilt in the face of reality. We feel guilty for the hurt we caused her. We feel guilty for not understanding the deep love in her eyes sooner. Looking back now, our hearts are full of regret. Regret for the time wasted in quarrels. Regret for not showing her more warmth and care when she was making silent sacrifices. Ultimately, the messenger erased all of Bokja's memories. Before leaving, she left Jongju with one final diary entry. The complex mix of love and apology is like a resilient thread. It weaves the unique and irreplaceable emotional bond between mothers and daughters. In the long river of time, we may still impulsively say hurtful words, but at the same time, that most sincere love remains deeply buried in our hearts and quietly given to each other in unexpected moments. However, this is not a discussion about forgiveness. It's more about understanding. Understanding the limitations caused by differences between two generations living in different eras. It is about understanding each other's feelings and emotions during specific events or moments. It is about understanding the pure and sincere love and care in family ties. Though all of this is incredibly difficult to achieve, it is this effort to understand that allows us to keep moving forward on the path of family love. To keep growing. This is because it teaches us that family love is not perfect, but gradually resolves conflicts and quarrels. It grows richer through understanding and tolerance. This understanding is the red thread that crosses generations. It is the key to breaking down emotional barriers and is the most precious treasure on our life's journey. No matter how many difficulties and challenges we face, it allows us to hold on to the warmth and strength that come from family love. This story really inspired me, as I still often argue with my mom over trivial issues. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to continue loving your mom while you still can, and while she is still there. See you in another touching and inspiring video.